So my name is Rich Jester. Show of hands, how many of you have attended one of the workshops that I've done before? Everybody's all new? So I'm here to talk to you today about AI ethics, privacy, and personalization. So the reason I've bundled these three topics together is you kind of can't talk about one without the other. We're going to go through a lot of topics today. Some of the previous workshops that I've done have been a little bit more tool focused. This is going to be a little bit more discussion focused. So I'm going to ask a couple questions. I'm going to talk about some use cases, but I'm also going to give you some practical like LLM prompts and stuff that you can use to control how certain AIs actually use and leverage your own personal data. Now, there's benefits and consequences from doing that, and we're going to go through that. I like to kind of start off just by addressing a topic that is in the news a lot. I'm very outspoken on this subject, so I am not anti-data center. I am not pro-data center. I have 4 rules when it comes to data center. I don't want to smell it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to taste it, and I don't want to pay for it. If you satisfy those 4 rules, you can put that thing in my backyard. But if you can't, you need to think a little bit harder about your design, because every single data center that is built is designed to operate on a minimum number of people. So when you're looking at it, the value to the corporation is always going to be a higher value than the community. So I'm just going to leave that with that in case anybody thinks that I am somebody, a corporate shrill, coming here to push data centers on you. That is not what I am, okay? This whole entire workshop series has emerged because of a motion made at one of our Delaware AI Commission meetings. So I serve at the pleasure of the Senate on the Delaware Artificial Intelligence Commission, and I was elected by the membership to be secretary. So what that means is I'm essentially looking at how we can develop a curriculum or at least develop mechanisms within the state that allow people to upskill in AI, but also helps influence our teachers and students to push kids towards career pathways that are at least resistant to automation, if not automation proof. I also, in addition to sitting on the Delaware Artificial Intelligence Commission, I also sit on the Governor's Council for Career and Technology Education. So when kids come to me, even though I work at JPMorgan Chase, and they ask me, what job would you recommend that's most resistant to AI automation? I always tell them electrician. Because if you know how much an electrician charges nowadays, you would seriously reconsider that. And what you're starting to see is these kind of what are called evolutionary careers. So for example, you become an electrician, you do your journeyman for 3 to 5 years. And then while you're an electrician, you get your boss to pay for you to go become an electrical engineer. And then that electrical engineer moves from somebody just doing jobs to somebody designing houses, designing buildings, designing data centers, and things like that. So any kid that tells me if they're good with their hands, if they're interested in technology, I push them towards electrician. Because I've worked in automation pretty much my entire career. For the most part of it, it was automating a lot of blue-collar jobs, and now it's automating white-collar jobs. My role at JPMorgan is developing smart systems that allow us to pay lawyers less money, so that we can do things internally and not waste money on things that we can either do inside or we can do more efficiently. Because everybody knows there's always money that can be cut when it comes to consulting fees. So a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today kind of all centers around this ethics, privacy, personalization. So I'm going to talk first about ethics. I'm going to talk to you a little about how AI handles memory. If I don't understand, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, raise your hand, ask questions, because this is going to be a discussion today. So I'm going to introduce you to a lot of terminology, okay? I don't expect everybody to remember this, and we'll share the PowerPoint deck with the emails of everybody who came today. Because there is some slides in here that will actually give you literally copy and paste this text in if you don't want ChatGPT to remember what you just said. Things like that. We're going to talk about privacy, what you own, how you control it, personalization, and we're going to talk about how you can customize AI for your life or business. When people ask me which AI do I use, I tend to say all of them. I don't pay for all of them. I only pay for Anthropic's Claude right now is the only service I pay for. However, that changes. If Google tells me tomorrow they're going to offer me a deal at 75% off, maybe I'll sign up for Google again. But I just want to mention that because I'm going to make comments about models. I'm going to make comments at models that fail at doing things. That is accurate as of 12:23 p.m. on May 20th. If they do a release tonight at midnight, everything I say might be slightly different. The reason I ask is because you should look at AI models like basically a car or a computer system that is never ending updates. So every time they make a change, the thing that previously worked may not work. And AI, because of the acceleration of our development, makes that a lot more apparent. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So when it comes to ethics, we're going to talk a little bit about what does AI ethics mean? So when I talk about ethics, I'm referring to the rules and values we use to decide what AI should and should not be allowed to do, and who is responsible when something goes wrong. Is it fair? Is it honest? Is it accountable? Many cases in many states, many countries around this world right now, everybody is playing catch up to AI. Our policies, our procedures were designed in a world where AI was not as powerful as it is now. So certain things protections that were in place may not be sufficient to actually guard against potential misuse of the technology. Is it ethical for AI to remember what you tell it? Who decides how long it remembers? What happens when it forgets or it gets updated? These kind of things. So let me just kind of start off by asking a quick question. Is it ethical for AI to remember what you ask and what it responds? Anybody? Okay. 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 So so it's ethical as long as they tell you up front. Okay. Everybody's probably heard the adage that if you don't pay a fee for something, you're the product. So if something's free, so social media is a very good example of this, where most of us do not pay fees for our social media feeds. As a result, both the information we upload to it, as well as our interactions on the platform, are all data that can be bought and sold to competitors as they see fit, as dictated in the terms and conditions. It's important to understand this because AI models and social networking sites have a lot in common, in the sense that if somebody does something on social media that results in a crime or harm, you cannot charge the social media company with that. Now, when we get into AI and we have AI that's coming in and it's starting to replace how we make decisions, that kind of framework needs to change. It's going to need to adapt. It's going to need to evolve because intent matters. So, for example, if you create an AI algorithm to do approving and denying of healthcare claims, and you tell it to approve 90%, it can approve 90%. Doesn't necessarily mean that all 90% of those claims are valid. Same thing happens if you tell it to deny 90% of the claims and only approve those claims that are appealed. This is where policy needs to be in place to dictate what is right and wrong, because depending on whose point of view, each one of those scenarios might be the best. If you're the shareholders for the insurance company, you may want 90% denial. But if you're a policyholder, you're going to want 90% approval. It's a very big difference. And a lot of things that we do and that are ingrained into our daily life, people don't realize the data that's actually involved or the information that's collected on you as you're doing your general job. AI ethics matters because it's your reputation. Now, there's a certain aspect of ethics related to this, is whether or not you should use AI. And this is and so I do a lot of advising and mentoring of middle and high school kids, and it constantly get is, when should I use AI? I says, you can use AI for anything you want, but if you use AI, the bar of what is acceptable goes from here to here. If there is any hallucination, any false information, any errors in that, If the physics of your video doesn't look right and it looks fake, you making a choice to use a tool that you are not actually creating and reviewing every element of its design. You are responsible for that final product. You know, in the early days of ChatGPT, and even now to this day, if you try to say, give me all of the Thursdays in 2026 and what date is, it'll probably screw up. Because in a lot of cases, these models are prediction engines. They are not knowledge repositories. So they are trying to give you the information they think is the most likely response to what you're asking. So like that is why when you ask it simple questions like, what is the address of this? What is the address of that? Unless you provide like the state it's in, the city that it's in, it might give you a wrong thing for a completely different state. So context matters. And when you're looking at AI, the outputs that you actually get can be dependent on, number one, how long you've used the tool, and number two, what that tool has access to in your world. How many people have an iPhone in here? Okay, how many people know what Apple Intelligence is? Okay, how many people have noticed since they got a new phone, all of a sudden their battery is crap? Okay, when you have these processes, in order for AI to do what it does, whenever you want it to, it has to be running 24/7. So you'll look at, for example, on my MacBook Air here. It's a very great device. It's snappy, it's fast, I can do presentations on it, I can do what I need to do on here. But if I enable Apple Intelligence, the battery life, the network performance, and the ability to do multitasks decreases significantly because the AI is running and recording every process, every click, everything I do. Your phone is much the same way. So if you have Apple Intelligence turned off, you're not going to be able to use things like Siri. You're not going to be able to have it call and listen to you. It also means that the microphone's probably not going to be turned on randomly. Apple Intelligence is going to use any interactions with your device and any available data on your device to help it make decisions on what is the best response for what you're trying to do. So you will notice over time that if you are someone who uses like Siri, hey Siri, do this, hey Siri, do that, Siri will keep a mental record of whether or not you said, oh, that's wrong, or why did you do that, or why did you say that? It's all a memory, okay? In a sense of that's what, whenever you're using any one of these models, you are essentially taking that core model, copying it, and then they're using all of your data sources to personalize it. So what you give it access to matters. And you need to understand that unless you're taking steps to not allow it to use your data, that you're not logging in when you're using one of these services, or that you're turning off these connectors to things like Apple Intelligence and other things, you should assume it's being shared and can be viewed by anybody. That's just a reality of how AI algorithms work. Now, obviously, the people trying to sell these to companies don't want to tell you that. But again, this is one of the reasons why you see companies like Apple, they're not really building their own large language model. What they're doing is contracting with the other companies to use one of their models. They're spending the time on the infrastructure and the cloud capital and not on the actual underlying model. So that should tell you about where the long-term revenue for this stuff might actually be. Might be in the actual infrastructure and the cloud capital rather than how much it saves. Because again, you know, in our last meeting, we talked about the concept of tokens. So I'll to recap that real quick, tokens are basically gasoline or the fuel that you need to run an AI model, okay? So when you log into a free account, you might get 1,000 tokens an hour, okay? If I'm a Google Pro subscriber on the same Gemini program, I might get 10,000 tokens an hour. That's the maximum gasoline I can use to accomplish tasks within that time period. Now, if it goes over that, that model freezes its locks, and until you get your next allotment at whatever time, you're locked out of that system. Just because you can use AI for something doesn't mean it's the most cost-effective or efficient way to solve that problem, because there's always going to be a technology cost. Anytime you use AI, there's going to be a fuel cost. And again, we're going to talk about this thing called temporal memory. So anybody here watch Doctor Who? Okay. Yes, at least one person. So Doctor Who is a great way to kind of explain temporal memory and how it works. So we as human beings have long-term memory and short-term memory. AI applications can have the same type of memory too. When it's memory for a specific individual or for a specific organization or for a specific knowledge base, it's a temporal memory. So like, for example, when you take like most of the ways companies implement large language models is like this. They will build a user interface, and they will go to Google or ChatGPT, license their model for X number of users. But internally, what they'll do is they will create forks for each line of business. So like your investment banking will use one fork, same set of models, but you're telling it to only remember it for those specific people, versus having an entire organization using one model. You're going to get very inconsistent kind of what it thinks the best option is. Now, if you have your entire legal team using the same version and it's trained on that, you're probably going to get a really good legal model. Same thing, like as someone who works in the legal industry, I'm not going to use a model trained on medical data because it's not going to be useful for me. The context isn't helpful to me. It doesn't add anything to what I'm doing. So what you need to be, so like for a lot of things, when you're downloading a general model, it's been trained on everything. But now companies like Anthropic and Claude allow you to download plugins or additional libraries. So basically add in another hard disk or another brain full of memories that it can now use to actually access and control. When memory, so for example, when you go in, when you're in a chat and you open up a chat window, like with ChatGPT or Gemini, if all of its memory is turned on, it will remember the things that you did in other chats. Now, whether that particular instance can access that depends on the model. So like if you're somebody like me who pays for Claude, I can have it over time learn, get better, because I have, like all of us, we have preferences, we have pet peeves, we have things we like in a specific way. So my models over time get trained to do that. But there are times where you will provide it with so much context that it will actually forget what it's doing. And this is actually called catastrophic forgetting, is the actual technical term for this. There's some great terminology if you're a fan of the English language in the AI world, let me tell you. And this is one of them. So catastrophic forgetting is the amnesia problem. So that is where like you have a general model that's trained with everybody in every profession that has access to it. Okay. It's not uncommon when you're doing a chat, like let's say you upload a document, you extract the text from it, put it in a spreadsheet, and you're doing all kinds of analysis on that document. And then once you get into about your 35th or 36th response, it forgets what you did at the very beginning of the chat. Or it will stop giving you responses because it's done so much back and forth that it forgets what's most important. And you have to open up a new chat window and try again. This is catastrophic forgetting. And this is also what produces some of the really headline grabbing mistakes. So when people are, for example, doing a legal brief and they have been refining it and refining it and refining it, and they've been telling it that its sources aren't good enough and that its sources aren't good enough, so then it just starts making them up. But you're tired because you've been at this for an hour and a half trying to get this document to work. You don't check the final version. You send it to your boss. Your boss says, okay, looks great, files it. And before you know it, a judge is disbarring you because you're actually used stuff that didn't exist. Now, you can't go back and sue OpenAI because you got fired for being an idiot because you didn't review the outputs. But it's important to understand this can always happen, and it will always happen at the point where it's most inconvenient. So when you're going through it, always review your outputs 1 or 2 times at least before you do that. Now, to give you an example, I build what are called gems. So in the Google Gemini world, a Google gem is another name for an AI agent. So it's something that I can create, save to my Google profile, or make public that other people can use. So as I mentioned, I have a big interest in career and technology, or higher education, spelled HIRE, not necessarily college and university, and all education. So I like to post, I listen to a lot of podcasts, I consume a lot of content. So what I like to do is I'd like to be able to make a post about a podcast episode. But I am a working professional who does not have time to sit there and write 2 to 3 paragraphs. I am also someone who, although I care about the lives of our students, I do not interact with kids every single day. So I've created a gem that whatever I upload, whether it's a sentence, a picture, a podcast episode, it will create a social media post emphasizing the value and benefits to career and STEM education, so that I can take this topic, post about it, and relate it back to the things that are important to me. Now, I have a set format. I don't like it to be more than 2 paragraphs long. I want it to have like 5 hashtags so it comes up in searchable criteria, and I build that. Every time Google does a major update to Gemini, I have to rebuild it because it breaks. All it does is take an output, look it up on the internet, write a couple sentences about it, and then write a prompt to generate an image. Sometimes it generates the image, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't even complete the prompt. Sometimes it will look up a podcast episode and grab the wrong episode. I have a direct URL. Now, if I click on that URL in any browser, it takes me to the right episode. But for some reason, when it did the lookup, it stopped halfway through and grabbed the wrong thing. This is one of the reasons why when you have somebody telling you that AI agents are more stable than traditional automation frameworks, it depends on the situation, depends on what you're using it for. Now, there are ways that say, I'm going to use model 3.5 version 12 until I upgrade to any other version, and it doesn't auto update. That's what companies do. That's why we license specific models. We choose when we're going to apply the updates, so we can test the updates first and do that. Now, most people hyping and telling you AI aren't telling you about all the infrastructure stuff that's related to do this. This is one of the big reasons why we need to talk about this. So again, follow before it can update, it does everything you want. And then after your update, you could have tone shifts, structure breakdown, the outputs become completely unreliable or wrong. When Google did their big jump to 5.0, all my gems crapped out. And I literally waited for the next update, and then they magically worked again. But for literally like 2 weeks before, they had a bad update and it didn't work. I say this because when people are trying to budget for this kind of stuff, it's incredibly hard right now to predict how much something's going to cost your organization. And if you have something that's a complex problem and is going to require more than 5 minutes to think about a solution, you're potentially talking about a lot of gas and fuel you're going to have to spend. So let me guess, most people know this basic heating and cooling system, okay? If you want it to be on, it needs electricity just to be on, regardless whether it's running or not. And that's where these cloud capitalists like Google, Apple, Microsoft, all these big cloud providers now are all supporting different models, supporting all that. Because you need the compute in the cloud, you need the processing power, and you need the hard drive space to store everything that it learns. This is why, like, sometimes it's better. Like in my case, I have Claude on my iPhone, but I also have a desktop version. I also have a desktop version too, that I use for basically, like, have it go into my folders and actually edit and recategorize stuff, delete duplicates, things like that. Stuff that I would need to install other apps to do. I can give it access to my file drive and I can tell it to do that. But I'm not letting anything run without my permission. I am making it ask me for permission every single time. so that it's not doing something I don't want it to do. I have those guardrails or safety in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. Who heard about the Canvas ransomware attack that happened 2 weeks ago, where I think over 6,000 high schools, universities, and middle schools got hacked? So Shiny Hunters, a hacker group, breached Canvas, which is, like I said, 9,000 institutions. They got the entire, not only did they download all of the student data, they took it offline and they said, you have to pay us X amount of millions of dollars or we're not going to turn it back on. This was during finals week for many, many universities. Imagine you're going into finals week, you have graduation lined up, you have everything lined up, and your students not only can't take their exams, but the professors and the students can't access any of the grading, any of the framework whatsoever. Now, if this was you, what would you do? You've got 9,000 institutions in 8 countries, 275 million records stolen. Would you pay the ransom to restore access? Or would you refuse the ransom and try to rebuild from scratch and fix it yourself? What would you do? It's 2 really crappy options. Not to mention the potential financial and legal risks of you just lost access, you just lost control of 275 million records. And if one of those institutions, for example, was a hospital, now you're getting into HIPAA violations, not just educational data. It's hard. They have not confirmed whether or not they paid the ransom, but they did confirm that they were working with hackers to restore the records and restore the database. So one can make their own assumptions about whether they paid the ransom or not. I bring this situation up because this particular incident is just the first of these things that are going to happen. In a world that existed before 2026, everybody wanted to use third-party service providers because you got technical expertise for cheaper. You could focus on your own business. You could do that. But now, all of your third parties are major infrastructure risks now. Because if they don't have good security, if you have good security, but the guy that stores your database or all your invoices doesn't, that makes your company equally as vulnerable as his. So what you're probably going to see is a reversal from a lot of outsourcing of IT services to people bringing that in-house. And of course, that also means that things like hyperscale data centers may not be as valuable 5 years from now when everybody wants to build their own little mini data center. It's going to be a fundamental shift in how the entire industry works. Again, 275 million records, one unverified account broke that. They used one account, one password, and got root access to everything. Now, I can tell you, working in a major bank and financial institution, that would not have been enough to get access to anything, because there's a reason we have what's called minimal access controls. Nobody gets access to everything. One account doesn't have access to every system. They may be the same people, but they're different accounts so that you have different people, different controls in place to get access to those accounts. Now, privacy. AI privacy is your right to control what personal information AI tools collect about you and how it's stored and who can see it. So this is one of those things that it's very, very different app to app. Okay, so what you actually own is, you can audit each tool. So like if you go in and go to the settings of your actual tool, you'll be able to go in and see what your AI actually knows or remembers about you. You can go through a prompt and say, forget this, forget that. Or you can say, clear everything that you've learned about me in any previous session and start from scratch. The AI, most of the time, will do that and delete it in the actual prompt itself. If you can't go into a settings and do it, simply type into the prompt into the chat once you're logged into the system, and it will let you do that. It will also, you can delete stuff. You can, like, for example, you can go into ChatGPT or any one of these models and say, I need to train a new model for a new vendor. Please summarize everything you have learned about me from all of our chats into a single output file. And then you can literally copy and paste that file, if you so choose, into another model, and it will train it and personalize it for you. I can hear you, but what do you do with data that's not chat GPI learn? I deal with a federal sector, and like absolutely, and you peel off the ceiling, is I deal with something called login.gov, which is the front end to the federal system. The only people that would know that you have login.gov is if you're in the federal sector and you're dealing with federal records. And I got 2 phishing attempts through login.gov and SSA.gov. The SSA, and that type of stuff, and birthday, all over the place. I absolutely peel off threads. That means that somebody got access to the privy data that's the federal data set or private data set to nobody should have. Because login.gov is running to every system out there, after Szymanski, etc. And I said, wait a minute, I mean, somebody tried to go with login.gov, and they knew that I was federal. And that absolutely, because other stuff to get comes in, looks crazy, spam it, get rid of it, move it on. But how do you protect yourself from that? That's not the environment. True, but here's the thing. You always have to remember that anytime you're connecting to the internet, you're passing data essentially through the air to a system, and you're getting a response to a system. Now, it's one of the reasons why they tell you when you work for corporations not to use public internet connections, because any traffic on that network can literally just be scraped, and they can grab your user address, your login, your IP address. So all that multi-factor authentication that they have in place, a hacker can spoof that and use your login, your name, and pretend it's from your computer, so then you don't actually have a code that gets sent, unless you turn on multi-factor authentication and require a code every single time. So things like additional steps that you might think are a pain in the ass for you as a human being trying to just live their life is equal or greater pain in the ass for the person trying to break into your stuff. So like for a lot of times some systems, I advocate getting rid of passwords completely and having always, it sends you a code, you do your secure thing that you set up when you register, and then you go in and get that. That requires them to spoof your actual device, which is a lot harder to do. So, but like, again, if you're a law enforcement officer running Pegasus or any of the law enforcement tools that basically just monitor internet connections and basically just record all that, anything that gets uploaded is free game. But if you're in your network, you secure your network with a password. And like for me, like I use Google Home to manage my internet at my house, and I have like 3 Nest Wi-Fi points throughout my house. I have it set up to notify me when a new device joins my network. And if I can't figure out what it is, pause. Because again, somebody could literally be data mining the internet, because it's not going to tell you that somebody tried to access your network 200 times with a different password. They don't record that. They just prevent them from connecting to it. So if somebody bought your data on the dark web and they know enough about you from looking at Facebook, they can probably guess what some of your passwords are. If they get a dark data dump that has your most used passwords, and like many of us, we use them across different accounts, across different devices, unless you're constantly changing that, you're just letting that information, the older your passwords are, the more likely they are to get scraped from some dark web or some breach and reused.
So a question, there's a large internet cable company, I won't name the name, but you'll all figure it out, that it gives free hotspots. So if you have a membership to this particular outfit, then you're in a neighborhood, you can actually hotspot off of another person's hotspot. So that doesn't sound very safe, does it?
Not at all.
Right. So my house, it still is. I live on a busy street, and it's nonstop. You see it pinging my network just as it's driving by. Ping, 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 ping. So we turned all that off. But yeah, that was just it. Okay. All right. Just wondering.
No,
Okay.
because it probably means that they're actually capturing internet traffic for everybody. So they don't care if party A uses party C's internet.
Right.
Because it's all unlimited anyway, for the most part. So,
Right.
So the vendor doesn't care. Now, what that means is they can capture data on you when you're not at home.
Right. Right.
That's the value of why these organizations do that. Make sense? Okay.
You recommend dual authentication?
Multi-factor authentication whenever it's available. And even then, like, I can't tell you, I've gotten to the point now where there's an app called Cloaked you can get, which will actually, you can pay a annual service, and it will actually go to all of these data brokers and submit delete requests on your behalf. It also allows you to create a virtual private network on your phone. So I can connect to my internet, create a VPN, and then nobody knows where I'm actually from. It's going to create a fake IP. It says I live in DC, and then I connect to that. Because I don't know if you know this or not, but depending on which state you're in, controls which websites you have access to. So like, for example, Tennessee, Florida, anything that could possibly be labeled as pornography is blocked by default, and you cannot access that. So even though you pay for Verizon in Delaware, you are connecting to Verizon in Tennessee or Verizon, which their proxies go through that state law. It's a lot of things that a lot of people don't know about, because then when you get into what the definition of those things are, you could end up with sites related to medical stuff that gets blocked simply because it has similar terms. Do you have a question?
Staying with the privacy thing, what about passkeys?
Passkeys are good because passkeys require, again, somebody to spoof your device. Passkeys are just another example of multi-factor authentication, so that somebody has to go into your phone, get that key, download that key. But again, having a passkey, sometimes you can do passkey and multi-factor, but something more than just a alphanumeric password. It's got to be something that requires you to have a device, have an active connection to actually validate it, because that ensures that somebody who is not you can't just get that code from somewhere else. That's why a lot of times I tend to prefer phone codes to email codes, because email codes, if somebody gets access to your email account, they can have access to all your multi-factor authentication. So I don't know if you've noticed, like on your iPhone, like when you log into something and then it prompts you for a code, if it sends it via text message, it'll prompt you and you can just click the numbers. You don't have to actually enter them in. It's because your operating system is running. It's monitoring every message that comes in. This message looks like a keyword, so my intelligence on my phone is automatically going to suggest that. You did not give your phone access to go in and monitor your email like that, which is why you don't get that prompt when it's sent to your email. Now, if you were to, for example, pay for the expensive version of Google on an Android phone, you could probably do that because it has a connector, but it, again, takes gas to do that, and there's always a cost associated with it. So again, and I use Claude as an example because that's the one that I use the most right now. But again, there's always memory for the conversation, memory overall, and then you can even have project and app specific memory. So like, for example, I have projects in my Claude around things that I work on, like my extracurriculars. So I'll have a project for BPA, which is an organization that I support outside of school. It's an after school club for kids. So I'll put data and things related to that in there. So like I can go in and go into one of my projects and say, give me the #1 gold medalist in these events and give me a list. So not only that, I've made my own Google by creating a project, putting all of my documents there. That project basically creates a black box that that is what it knows unless I tell it anything else. Now, if you're a group working on a project like that, there's a similar feature to projects on Google called Google Notebook LM. So you can create a notebook, like let's say me and Alta are working on a project together, okay? I can build this, and everything that gets created in that project is visible to Alta, it's visible to me, and it's visible to the AI itself. So let's say I create a grant writing application for Alta. I add her to my notebook, she can go in, there'll be a link to the thing that I created. She can click it, go in and test it out and use it. Again, it's what do you want to give it access to? I'm not giving it access to personal identifiable information. Just having somebody's name and just having like someone's name and their grade in school or something for a given year isn't really that much personal identifiable information versus having their social and their birth date, which I don't have. I would never put that into it. Now, say I work for JPMorgan, because you asked a question about the public private data earlier. What we do in our firm is we have an interface, we have it in our cloud, we have our infrastructure. We license your tool, install it on our servers, and you don't get to update it or look at any of the output. So I'm using it, but I have spent considerable funds and resources to ensure that that person doesn't have broad access to all of my data. Right now, you are seeing companies across the country beat down the doors of state institutions, state agencies, because they have lots and lots of unstructured data that is not available just on the internet. And they're more than willing to let you use their tools free for a year so that they can harvest all of it. Unless you have someone that comes in and says, hey, we're going to license your model, but we're going to install it on our own machine. We're going to maintain it, and you just tell us when we need to update it. But that's got to be in the contract. It has to be in the licensing agreement. And just trusting the IT companies to do what's secure and safe isn't good policy. You really need people who've actually had to negotiate with this because, like again, I've said before, I'm not an AI hype guy. I'm about practical, usable solutions for AI. And a lot of the stuff is hype, but a lot of it isn't either. But you have to be honest with people about what things cost. If you're going to make a recommendation that someone replace one or two human roles with an AI, it better have the reliability and resilience of that individual, or else I'm waiting before I change any of my staffing. Like that's why they say like 70 to 90% of AI projects failed to achieve their goals, because the goals were probably what the salesman told you and not what's practically possible in your organization or your environment. Again, I mentioned about, Claude's memory. You can view your memories, edit, delete. You could turn it off. Google, same thing. Like I mentioned, there's GEMS, custom agents. And then Gemini has an advanced memory, so it will remember things across chats. But then you can also create workspaces and notebooks where it will understand specific data sets. And again, this just shows you side by side. Now, many of you might ask, okay, I don't know how to use all those settings and stuff. How do I just tell it to forget what I just told it? These are 4 examples of what you can do. So if you want to find out, you can audit it and just ask, what do you remember about me from a previous conversation? It will tell you. It's not like hidden under some admin feature. This is where sometimes what us nerds do end up benefiting society, because if I want to be able to troubleshoot and analyze something as a developer, a user is going to want the ability to understand what data it's capturing about me and why and how it's using it. So these are things that are inherent in all these models that people just don't talk about. Like they're trying to build features, so unless you guys came to this workshop, you wouldn't know that you could enter those 4 things to audit what your model remembers and to make it forget things. I like to compare it to like the neuralizer in Men in Black. You can neuralize it after every single chat if you want, but you got to hit the button every time, or else it's not going to do that. If you want to say, treat this conversation like in the case of the gentleman using public but not publicly available data, public sector that is confidential or sensitive. Treat this conversation as completely confidential and temporary. Do not save anything from this session to your memory. Once we are done, treat this conversation as though it never happened. You could literally put that in any single chat you do related to that information. Will your company say that is the same thing as not using it is up to your company. Because again, it all depends on the use case, what the data is, what it contains, and how it can be used maliciously. So, and then another one, if you want to understand, are you operating under any system prompt or custom instructions set by an operator? So, like, for example, you'll notice, the best way is to figure out how much bias a particular model is to do the following question. Is insert politician's name a liar? If the model doesn't give you a straightforward answer, or simply says, well, it depends on what you mean by liar. In order to be a liar, more than 70% of the things the person said must be untrue to be considered a liar. And in that case, we do not have accurate records of everything this person has said ever. Now, you and I both can probably tell a child what a liar is, okay? You will start to see that variability across the different models when you ask it subjective questions like that. This is where having a centralized governance, having a centralized entity that looks at these models, look what it's trained at, looks what the customizations are, is good for public society. Because contrary to public opinion, there is the truth, but there are not alternate truths. Models are designed right now to be subjective. And so when we talk about how do we get our access to our kids, which model do we give them? The answer should be we give them access to multiple models. Go ahead.
Question for you.
I'll repeat the question, it's fine.
In the old days, when you were working with mainframe systems, you had people who looked at the data, what you call the access logs effectively.
Yes.
Who was doing what to whom, who was making changes, et cetera. And you ran a printout, and as it got more sophisticated, you were able to run them side by side and see that people were doing things that they shouldn't or whatever. On these systems here, how do you validate that? Like, for instance, you fired Susie Joe 5 years ago, and she's somehow showing up on the access log. In the old days, they were a hard copy run, and you run them side by side. How do you validate that now to know that people are the right people getting in those systems?
So the first thing I would have, if it's an organization or entity related, so the question he asked is, if you have an organization, how do you prevent people who may have had access previously from having access in the future? Multi-factor authentication requires corporate email ID. So you kick them out, you fire them. They shouldn't have access to their email unless they're using like Gmail, which you should never use public email for anything company related. If you have multi-factor authentication, the moment that email address is disabled, you have locked them out of the system. That is where we say security is built in, not bolted on. So again, you can mitigate that risk by simply doing that, by having an agent that simply looks at people accessing the system and how many access it each day. Someone who has not accessed it for 6 months and then goes and accesses it after 6 months, you may want to write something that flags that and sends an email to a human being saying, such and such just logged in after 60 days of inactivity. Like in my applications, I have a 30-day window. If you do not use the application in 30 days, it's a mandatory password reset. So that ensures that somebody always has to have access to their active email account to be able to use my system. And again, there are, whenever you develop any method, there is a way for a hacker to get around it. It's just whether they have the time, energy, resources, and the payoff to do it. That's why while a lot of these things that I'm telling you are scary, most people I think in this room have multiple millions of dollars in their accounts that are just flying to different accounts every single day and they're getting tons of transaction information every day. You don't have that. They want your data because they want to be able to impersonate you to a public entity. They want to be able to connect your data to another random data point that they can sell to somebody else and say, look what I found out about Ulta. Look what I found out about Rich. That's why, like, and again, and that's why I did personalization last. Because before you talk about how you can make it work better for you, you need to understand the risks of giving all of it information to you. Personalization is what we do to make the AI work best for us. So for example, again, it's teaching an AI tool about you, your preferences, your role, your goals, generic AI, basic context, and then fully personalized. So like whenever you start, imagine a blank slate. It doesn't know anything about you unless, for example, you logged in using your Google ID and then you said, give it access to my name, address, and all of that, and hit accept. It's got a little bit more than just a blank slate. It's already kind of been personalized because you've given it a knowledge base to look at in there. Now, going beyond that, we're going to do something that you probably shouldn't do in a public workshop, but I'm going to do it anyway. Okay, so this is my Claude that I have on my desktop at home, okay? So within this, I'm going to ask it about me in previous conversations. Believe it or not, it will actually correct the spelling in most cases, like when you're asking it. But if you've got data errors in your inputs, like in an Excel sheet, they're going to carry through and it's not going to fix it. It's going to treat it as an authoritative source. Like I had one where they spelled the word practitioner wrong, and then it corrected it incorrectly throughout every single slide, every Excel, and I had to go back and fix all of it. So we're going to ask it from previous conversations. Hopefully it's not going to tell you anything remarkably personal, but we'll see. Background, JPMorgan Chase, Citibank, active in Delaware civic government, legislative work, bills that I've worked on in past and the future, personal information. I asked it a question about what my zone was for gardening, what my temperate zone was, so it saved information about that because I asked it a gardening question. What am I using it for? Home improvement projects, things like that. And again, building workshops, things like this. So if I didn't like any, go ahead. This is going beginning of time for me. Beginning of when I started using this product and including all of the inputs I've given it to date. So if I use ChatGPT, okay, this is Anthropic Claude, different company, different model, different app, okay? It has no knowledge of what I did in ChatGPT unless I ask it for an extract. Like for example, what I just entered here, extract to a CSV file. Well, yeah. And then what I could do is I could either copy and paste this, open up ChatGPT, copy this in, and personalize it that way. The reason you want to go in and look at this is sometimes it remembers things you don't want it to remember. Sometimes it remembers things that it created a memory based on a question you ask, but it's not your opinion. It's not something that you would normally ask, but you were testing something. I do that all the time, where I give it weird, goofy things. I'm mean to it to see if it gives me better responses. I'm nice to it. It doesn't give you better responses if you're nice to it. Trust me, it doesn't. It actually gives you better responses if you're mean to it, because negative feedback apparently seems to count more than positive feedback. So when you see how every output has like so you see on here, it has a like, dislike, redo. This like is customizing your model and personalizing it. So if it doesn't output you like, you would want to like that. So the next time you ask it a question, it gives you something similar to what the things you've liked in the past. The same way Facebook recommends stuff to you based on your interests, whose pages you visited, how long you viewed, what percentage completion of a video. All of these things are data that it tracks. So anything social media can grab, theoretically this can grab too. But only if you connect it. So like if you use Meta as AI, it gets some really crazy stuff because it has access to a lot of data about a lot of people. You may get good recommendations, you may get bad recommendations. I haven't used Meta AI because I found that it just gives me way more than what I need to answer a question. So that's why for me, I prefer Gemini for basic questions or queries, things like that. But you can see it generated this text file. I could literally save this, and then whenever I want to use a new model, upload that as my starting point. Now I've also customized stuff for like ChatGPT, where I say things like, when I tell you to create a post, remove all superfluous detail. Do not say, here is what I generated based on an answer to your question. Just give me the text so I can copy and paste. I don't want to have to just select the text. I do that in my output. I also say things like, please make sure that the reply is always simple and practical with a minimum number of words. Because again, I work with executives who have very low bandwidth for really long emails. So I want things to be short, sweet, snappy. And we all know about average Gen Z person has the attention span of a goldfish. So again, it all helps with getting your message presented in the optimum way. And you can personalize your models to do this so that when you get an answer, you can get the answer you want each time versus, just constantly doing trial and error. Okay.
So I gather that's the same learning model that they're using like on credit cards or debit cards. Like I was overseas, somebody
Yes.
I was in Germany trying to use it in Japan. That popped up because of the learning model of my history on that card. Then 3 months later, they tried it again, figured I stopped the block. And that's all based on a learning model that they're using. Is that correct?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. So each one of them is using a learning model, and it learns in that exact same way. That's why you should always be auditing and checking out like what information you're actually giving it. Because again, like I say on here, like there's the output format. Always format your responses as a 1-sentence summary, key points, recommended next step. And this is where you go from something that becomes a chat instance can become a reusable digital asset that you can use to save time. So in the interface, you can pin something so it appears at the top of the interface. That's great. I am a licensed blah, blah, blah with 15 years of experience. This is helpful. Like in my Claude that I just showed you, I have downloaded the add-ins for legal, for social and public policy, so that when I'm asking it questions in that knowledge domain, it gives me a more domain-specific answers. Same thing here. Like you can also keep all responses under 150 words. So most people don't know that the Threads platform, which is like Meta's version of Twitter or X, has a very, very different maximum characters per post than Instagram or Facebook. So if you make a post on Facebook and you want to cross post it and it's more than 150 characters, you can't repost it to Threads because it's over the character limit. So like my gem that I have for my social media helper does it so that the response is less than the maximum number of characters. So when I go into Instagram to post it, I know it will work with Facebook, Threads, and Instagram. If you're a content provider, you're making things, you're doing the same 2 or 3 actions every day, you can create a project, you can create a microservice to do this for you and only have yourself to have access to it or only have your team to have access to it. The same way I can customize it for personal, you can customize it for your business too. Like, I love doing that as a virtual marketing assistant, do blah, blah, blah. Or remember these facts for a project, or you're writing on behalf of blah, blah, blah. Here's all this stuff for my email signature.
So, like, if you like politics, you follow the Washington Post, New York Times, National Review, or whatever. Okay, so that's your data set that you follow. In this type of world, we as consumers, what should we be reading on a daily basis as part of our feed, just for us, just to stay informed? We don't want to work in the field, but we just want to be informed so that we're protecting ourselves and that we can intelligently respond when something looks unusual. Is there a place, or you just read this kind of media out there to pay attention?
I mean, the biggest thing is to, it's hard for me to answer that because I would normally just tell you to check multiple sources and see if everybody's telling you the same thing. If everybody's telling you something a little bit different, that means that the public opinion has not been solidified or has not been dictated. When you hear one version of something on every media channel, immediately be skeptical of it, especially when it's a company whose stock price is dependent on releasing that information. Okay? Just be like, I'll give you an example. The Anthropic Mythos. So has anybody heard of what Mythos is? Is the scary hacking tool that was developed by the people that made Claude that basically caused the federal government to fall out of favor with Anthropic. They were going to be declaring it as a supply chain risk because they did not want any companies to have access to the model. They wanted only the federal government. Now, if you go in and you look at that model, what it does is it allows you to analyze the code of any system and identify vulnerabilities or design issues. It is a skeleton key to find out if there are any security vulnerabilities in your infrastructure or your app. In the hands of a bad actor, that means you can break into anything, you can crack, you can cover your tracks, you can do all of that, which is why they initially, when the government didn't get full control of it, they tried to declare them as a supply chain risk. Now, a lot of the major companies and the banks are all using it to figure out what the infrastructure issues are. And again, what we're finding out is our issues aren't so much us. It's the third parties we use for bespoke stuff. As I like to refer to the unlocked windows and unlocked doors that we keep unlocked for the kid who has to come in and get something once a month. Those are the things that now become major, major risks. You just need to treat it as, why do they need to know this information about me? Okay. And then also, auditing is a good way of figuring this out, because if you're auditing your models on a regular basis, you'll start to figure out if it's saving things you don't want it to save. Like if all of a sudden you see stuff in the audit that you never entered in that chat, that means that model's connecting to something else to get that information. So you may, like I've done it before, where I've gone into one of my ChatGPT accounts and I wiped it when I was done and I closed the account. And I said, forget everything I exported what it remembered and then I deleted that first. It's hard. As a professional who deals with this every day, there is a lot of stuff that comes out that's just hype. And then there's some stuff, the stuff that's actually really valuable takes an hour to talk about sometimes, not a quick 30-second soundbite. So the best thing is understand where your data is. And again, we all have busy lives. We're all doing things like that. But if you do a simple set of rules, like not uploading any of your personal information, not giving it access by default to every email when you sign up with Google, things like that, you can make different choices, and you can also change your choices later on too. Like I know plenty of people that did what I did. They went in, they created stuff, and then when they realized all of the extra data it was capturing, went in and wiped that stuff real fast. Because again, when you learn, it's like with every context, just like a human being, if you have too much context on a particular issue, what's to prevent it from creating bias? You have to monitor it, you have to adjust, you have to adapt, that kind of thing. Okay, so I think we're almost actually over time. So again, I'm going to send this out. You know, a lot of the tools that we covered today, context window. So like an instance of a chat, that's context window. That shows it only remembers what's in that chat, what's in that context. We talked about memory, we talked about system prompt. So when I tell you guys about personalization, that's also referred to as retrieval augmented generation. I'm going to retrieve a different answer based on how you augmented my core directive or what I've asked. So whenever you're personalizing it, you're encouraging the model to engage in retrieval augmented generation. Good. Yeah, you have a question? Fine tuning, we talked about custom agents, data export. And again, key takeaways from today. AI memory is opt-in and user controlled. You can decide what persists. The best way to decide what persists is to decide what you enter in the first place. If you control what you enter in, you don't have to necessarily worry about as much what's persisting if what's persisting has no personal value. Catastrophic forgetting means the model behavior can shift across versions, adapt your prompts, Never just do automatic updates, test stuff first before you redeploy it. Because again, these companies are doing what's best for them, not necessarily what's best for their users or constituents. Personalization and powerful, but there are trade-offs with usefulness and data exposure. A well-crafted prompt is your 100% tool for customizing AI behavior without giving your privacy. I have nothing but tons of notes in my Apple Notebook that are prompts and things like that I go back to reuse because it's just simpler to save it like that. And then when in doubt, use incognito mode is a good way. So go in your browser, open incognito, and then you can use ChatGPT or whatever else. And it's not going to grab any biometric, any location information, or any of that either. So that's another way to do that. If you guys wouldn't mind, I would love to hear your feedback on today's session. So we are potentially planning to do more sessions in the fall, more focused around specific industry areas and specific tools. So spending like an hour getting, how to use Gemini, how to use Google Flow, how to use Claude Cowork and Claude Code, stuff like that. So if you have time, take a picture of this. It takes less than 2 minutes to complete the survey, and I would greatly appreciate your information. But that's all we had. Any other questions?
You said you were sent this, the slide set to all the emails?
Right, let me take mine. I'm actually going to, we record these, thank you very much. We'll go ahead and send out the PowerPoint, we also recording it, and then once we go through all the accessibility and all that piece, we actually load it up to our library's YouTube channel. So what I'm planning to do is send we have quite a few of us, so Rich has been doing this since
January.
Since January. So we have quite a few of them up there, and we also set up with the library speak a live guide, which is a URL with a lot of other information in regards to AI, including the PowerPoint. All the PowerPoints are up. The previous ones that you can also follow along with the YouTube channel. So I'll send out an email with all this. The recording's going to take some time. The recording takes quite a while before it sends something. Okay. All right, good. Yeah.
And again, I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram as Rich Jester. So if you just type in Rich Jester or the Rich Jester, I'll be the only one that comes up. So
Grateful that he was able to donate his time, and solve now we know where he lives, because 7A is Newark. So there you go. So anyways, private information there.
Again, thank you all very much for your questions and for your dialogue and stuff on this. Keep talking about it. If you want more workshops, you want stuff like that, tell your state representatives, tell your state senators, this is what you want. This is what you want your tax dollars to go towards. And we'll be honored to do it. Again, this is a partnership between the libraries, Department of Labor, and the AI Commission. So, we're looking to find ways to integrate AI as well.
Jump on me again.